Hi there. Been gone for a couple weeks. I am indeed back, and I am reviewing today one of my favorite knives of all time. This is the Benchmade model 806D2, also known as the AFCK, or Advanced Folding Combat Knife. This was designed by Chris Karachi. It's got a design similar to some other knives you might have seen, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But just to let you know, this has gone through a few revisions, and it is sort of available today. I mean, it is, but it's a different configuration. So originally it had a round opening hole, which was licensed from Spyderco, and after a while that deal dissolved, and then Benchmade switched to this, which, as you can see, has an oval opening hole, which I think works fine. It's very functional. And you can get a partially serrated version, you can get the plain edge as you see here. There was originally also an uncoated version of the blade, and this one being made from D2 Steel, it does have a BT2 or black Teflon coating. And so there's been a few different changes. There's an older liner lock version, this one has the axis lock, and some of that stuff I'll talk about more in a moment. But I did buy this all the way back in January of 2005, so I've had this for over 7 years, and it's probably seen more use than any other folding knife that I own. I've carried it several days a week, every week, for the past 7 years. I bought this from bladeforums.com on their little for sale forum. I bought it from a fellow member for $80 shipped, and he did make a couple changes to it that will differ from this if you were to purchase it from Benchmade themselves. He had sanded and slightly beveled the edges of the G10, which made the handles a little bit smoother, a little bit more comfortable, and he also polished the pocket clip. So originally this was either painted black or it was parkerized, but he sanded it down. I rather like it. I think it looks nice. But if you were to buy a used one today or a new old stock, it wouldn't look exactly like this one here. So take that into account. As I mentioned, I have owned it for 7 years, and it's probably my most carried EDC knife. In fact, it is my most carried EDC knife out of all of my folding knives. Blade length is 3.9 inches. Blade thickness is 1/8 of an inch, or 0.125 inches. Overall length is 9.2 inches. And that's when it's opened, and closed 5.3 inches. So it's rather long. It's a rather long knife. And I'll make some quick visual comparisons to some other knives here, just to give you an idea. Here's a Spyderco Paramilitary 2. You can kind of see that the Paramilitary 2 has long been considered to have a long handle, but you can see there obviously it's quite a bit shorter. Here we have a Benchmade 710, which also has a shorter handle. So this is a long handle when compared to a lot of other knives. Another one to compare it to, a common one, is the Spyderco Endura 4. So we're talking a big handle there. But it's very comfortable, and it's easy to carry. And it does weigh a bit. It weighs a decent amount, but it's very, very comfortable to carry. And I don't think most people will find an issue with it. The new model that's out there today probably is going to differ a little bit in some respects. You know, the thickness, the weight, the handles are contoured now, or curved a little bit. So it's going to be slightly different in some respects. But for the most part, I think that performance, as far as the blade shape and the overall size, you know, overall comfort, should be similar. So if you're looking at purchasing the new model, I think that a lot of the details from this review should transfer over to that one as well. Benchmade had this listed on their website as weighing 4.38 ounces, and by my measurement that is way off. I weigh this in at almost exactly 5 ounces, so I'm not really sure where they were getting that weight from, if that's sort of a leftover from when this had a liner lock and maybe thinner liners. I'm not really sure, but they do show it as 4.38, and it is indeed 5 ounces in weight. Blade steel is D2, as mentioned before, and that is on here. Let's see. There we go. D2 with a little bit of patent information. And then on the other side of the blade, the Benchmade logo, and then way down below it, I'm not sure if it's going to come out, but it says 806 beneath the logo there. And you can see it's actually got a nicely beveled oval opening hole there. So it's not as squared, it's not as sharp or pronounced as you'll see on Spyderco's. And I think the newer round hole is sharp. I don't think it's beveled like this, but I like this too. It's very, very comfortable. That blade shape, as you can see, is a clip point. And the blade grind is a saber grind, or flat grind if you will. And you can see it comes up about halfway, maybe a little bit more than half on the blade stock. And then we do have a swedge that's ground in. And I would like to mention, I'll talk about more in a second, but I would like to mention that the grinds on this from the factory are way off. One side doesn't match the other very well at all, and in fact when the blade is closed it's got some funkiness going on. So it's not ground very accurately, but it's never really bothered me more than just how it looks. Handle material is G10, black G10, and then we've also got stainless steel liners. And those are kind of hard to see in this light, but you can see over here in the opening that it is milled out. So it is skeletonized to lighten it. But they're thick, heavy-duty steel liners, and they're very nicely done. The edges are all the fit and finish. As far as where it's been ground around, it all is very smooth, very comfortable, and it's all flush. So from like the backspacer here, which I believe is FRN or Zytel, something of that nature, but you can see that it's really well ground, really even from one separate part to another. It's almost as if it's one piece. There's a few parts where one piece sits a little bit higher than the other, but overall quite nice. It does have texturing. It's light, and over the years it's kind of worn down, so mine's a little bit smoother than if you were to grab one new out of the box, but the texturing is very effective and it works nicely. Have a little bit of jimping for those of you that like that. There's a little bit at the back of the blade there that lines up with some that's been cut out of the steel liners. And it holds your thumb there. Put your index finger there, it grips you. And that's the end of the jimping. There's none in the finger choil. None on the inside of the handles there. So that's all you get, is just at the back. Very comfortable. No irritating or tiring spots. It's comfortable in a lot of different grips. You can kind of move up closer on the handle. And I don't find the pocket clip annoying at all. It's very low profile and it doesn't hurt my hand. I'll use this for hours at a time depending on what I'm doing, and it's always comfortable. So that's nice. The construction, something I always forget to mention, but I have remembered on this one, is that this one is put together with Torx screws. So we have a T6 size Torx screws for the body, and there's just those two, which is kind of interesting, but overall very solidly built, despite the fact that there's not a ton of screws running through the back. And then a T8 at the pivot. And that's all that's holding it together. Kind of nice. It does have a lanyard hole, and it fits paracord perfectly. So if you want to put a little 550 through there, that'll do just fine for you. Pocket clip, of course, as I mentioned, and it is four-way positionable, so left and right hand carry is possible in either tip up or tip down configuration. And it does carry very nicely in my pocket. It sticks out about an inch, maybe 3/4 to an inch, sits out above your pocket. I've never had anyone say anything, nobody ever notices, and it's never gotten snagged or caught on anything and gotten knocked out of my pocket. So it sits very flat, very discreetly in one's pocket, and it's comfortable to carry. Overall balance is really nice, from front to back. I don't know if I can get there and get it to sit on my finger. And you can see that from front to back it feels right. It doesn't feel handle heavy. It doesn't want to tip forward when you're holding it in the most common position. It just feels perfect. Opening mechanism, as mentioned, is the oval opening hole. It's a little bit different from Spyderco's round opening hole, but it's just as functional. You can flick it open, or you can use the axis lock, pull back on it, and flop it open, just like a lot of other Benchmade axis lock knives. Both are totally acceptable. You can open it slow. So either one works. Pivot smoothness, if you can't see there, is very smooth. Just ridiculously super smooth. There's no grinding or grittiness to it, at least not when you keep it clean and well oiled. And blade centering is terrible. Mine, I don't know if I'll be able to catch it in this light, mine sits very far towards that handle scale. It always has, as long as I've had it. It doesn't matter what I do with the pivot screw, it's always gone to that side. I think it's the way that the blade is ground. I think it's actually kind of ground off center from one side to the other in the spine. And that's what I was talking about earlier, that those blade grinds are just totally wonky. I mean, even the edge, when I bought it, the edge was way off. One side was ground much higher than the other, and it still kind of suffers from this all these years later. As I've sharpened it and slightly changed that edge, it still remains off, that one side is ground higher than the other than right at the edge where I've sharpened it myself. So in that regard, it could have been a lot better, but again, it never stopped it from being one of my favorite knives, and it's never really affected its performance. It just kind of looks kind of lame. The lock is the Axis lock. This one here is, everything is all original. I've never had to replace the springs. I've read and heard about people saying the springs have broken after XYZ amount of time. On mine, it's all completely original, the same springs, and I've probably flipped this thing open and closed, thousands and thousands of times and never had an issue. So I give it really high marks there. I love the Axis lock. I think it's one of the coolest things that Benchmade's ever come up with. The lockup on this one is excellent, absolutely amazing. Vertically, there's no play whatsoever. Side to side, just a slight amount, and that seems to be common on any Axis lock knife I've ever had. Some people say that theirs doesn't have it. Mine does, but it doesn't bother me. I think it's just because it's dependent on how loose you like the pivot to be, and I like mine to be pretty smooth and pretty loose. So I've got it loosened to the point where it's not wobbling all over the place, but it just flicks in and out, like lightning. So there's a tiny bit of play that you won't be able to see on camera, but I can feel it when I wiggle the blade a little bit. But it's nothing. I'm still delighted with the lockup overall. And vertically, to me, is really all that really counts. Even on some lockbacks, you'll get a bit of vertical play, but this one has none. So I have every confidence in the lock and the blade and the handle, everything. I never feel like it's gonna have any problems, and it never has over all these years. I've never had any failures. I've never had the lock fail. I've never had the blade wiggle or wobble or anything that might make me feel like it was going to fail or have any problems. So that's always been perfect. It cuts very easily. The tip of it, because of that swedge, you can see it comes to a fine point. Mine's a little bit rounded at the tip because sometimes with my Spyderco Sharp Maker, I'm a little bit lazy or negligent or irresponsible, whatever you want to call it, and I'll let it slip on the stones a little. So it's not quite as laser precise pointy as it could be, but the shape of the blade itself is awesome. I love it. Love the belly. I love that there isn't a recurve. It just comes out straight until we hit the belly, sweeps up towards the tip, and it pierces because of that thin tip, that thin profile. It pierces excellently, slices superbly. Awesome shape all around. Love the shape of this blade. Now, when it comes to sharpening this blade, that can be a bit of a love-hate relationship. Now, D2, as this uses, is a hard steel, and it holds an edge for a really, really long time. So if you sharpen this up and you maintain it, you will hardly ever have to do long touch-ups, a little bit of stropping, and this will last just months on end. Just a little strop here and there, and this will just go forever before it needs a full reprofiling or resharpening. But the downside is that if you let it go for a while, and there's been times over the last few years that I'll just use the crap out of this blade, and that I'll use the heck out of this blade, and over time it's gotten fairly dull, still reasonably sharp, but dull to the point that when I went to go sharpen it again, I was sharpening for a long time. So that's something to keep in mind if you do go with D2 or another hard steel like that. You do want to be aware that it's best to maintain it. Any knife is really, but with those harder steels, it's best to maintain them carefully, and I wouldn't say often, but just maintain it. Just make sure you're keeping up with the edge so that it doesn't get so dull that it takes a really long time to bring it back to that nice sharp edge. Fit and finish is excellent, other than the horrendous blade grinds that I mentioned already. And I've used this blade for just about everything, so I'm really happy with its performance. I've cut up paper, tape, boxes, cord, rope. I've whittled and carved wood with it. I've used it for gardening or landscaping, food and produce. I've even cut wire. I know we're not supposed to cut wire with our knives, but I've done it. A little bit of copper wire here and there, and it has performed wonderfully in all of those tasks. I think it was actually very obviously designed to be a tactical knife, and I have no interest in that. I did at one time, and now I don't, so I won't speak on how well it works, you know, as a self-defense knife, but you can maintain a really good grip on it, and you know, it's sharp and pointy, so you know, hey, what the heck are you gonna do? If you're using it in a tactical role, I think you'll be happy, but I think it's just an excellent general utility knife. I think it's awesome. Something I've noticed, now that I'm thinking of it, is that, and it's probably not going to show up on here, but there's a little bit of wear inside the back spacer, and that is my own fault, and that's because I'll sling the blade closed using the axis lock, so it'll kind of bang in there. And over the years, that's actually it's kind of chopped at a little bit of the plastic in there. You can kind of see it, that little light spot to the right there. That's from me slamming the blade in there. So, you know, learn from my example. Don't do that, but if you want to, this blade still holds up to it. This knife has been slammed shut like that thousands of times and just keeps coming back. The overall price and availability for this particular knife is a bit moot because this is discontinued. So you can't buy the 806D2 new at retail anymore, but there is a limited edition version out now that has a slightly different handle shape, and that it's contoured. It's convex a bit on the handles, and it's blue-black G10, and it has an M390 blade steel. So quite a nice blade steel on it. It goes for around $200 nowadays. So if you like this overall configuration, the overall design, you want to try it, that is available. And I looked this particular discontinued model up on eBay, and you can actually buy them new for about the same price, maybe a little bit more. So around 200, maybe 250 on a bad day, you could buy this exact same one. Would I recommend it over the newer one? Probably not. I would never buy another one at that price. You know, when this one came out, I think it was around $100, and I really wish Benchmade would bring this model out in a more basic steel and in a less expensive, less fancy G10 patterning, and lower the price on it. I think this knife deserves to come back, you know, in full production at $100. And at $100, I would recommend it all day long. At $200 for the limited edition, you have to want to collect it. You could carry that knife, and it's going to hold up to years, if not a lifetime of use. But for $200, it's, to me, that's when you start getting into the realm of something that you might, you know, kind of a keepsake versus an everyday carry kind of knife. So I guess it just depends on your budget constraints. For me, $200 is a lot of money right now. So if this were still $100, I'd say, you know, all day long, everybody needs to own one. At $200, I'd say really only if you just can't live without it. There are similar knives out there that I think might offer, you know, obviously a little bit better value without as nice of materials. One of those would be the Spyderco Endura, this one of course being a Spider Edge, but just a little bit shorter on the blade, but still about the same size overall, and very similar performance. You know, very similar blade shape and length overall, and you know, much cheaper. I mean, even at the time when the 806 was originally released, we're talking, you know, $100 to probably $120, and the Endura's always kind of sat around $50 to $60. So that would be similar performance at a much lower price, but of course you're not going to get, you know, the premium steel and the premium materials G10 with the thick liners. Other stuff that's out today that would give similar performance would be, as I showed before, the Benchmade 710 would make a good choice, and you could see once again very similar blade size, similar shape, smaller handle. So if you want something a little bit lower profile in your pocket, maybe look at the 710. Something that I think there might be a limited edition out today, I'm not completely sure, but man, I sure wish they made this one, is the Benchmade 805, which is really similar. Shorter blade, slightly shorter handle, and it uses a thumb stud, of course, instead of the opening hole. Mine is actually still brand new. I don't carry it. I don't know really what I'm saving it for, but I am. I'm just kind of hanging on to it. But this one I really wish they'd bring back in full production, just the same as I wish they'd bring back the 806 into full production. And of course, I showed it before, but I'll show it one more time. Spyderco Paramilitary, considerably shorter blade with a wider, you know, profile and a much smaller handle, but kind of fitting in the same role, kind of fills the same void. And to me, these two knives are interchangeable. So there's a few different choices from other companies on the market today. either at a similar price or at a considerably lower price that are going to give you similar performance. So, you know, keep your eyes open for other choices. And if you see like a crazy deal on this one, absolutely by all means get it. I do recommend it. It's an excellent knife, and this one's never going to leave me. I'll always carry this one off and on for years and years to come. And I imagine, you know, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, I'll still have this knife, and it'll probably be in very similar condition. I should mention real quick that that BT2 coating, while unnecessary, has held up nicely. You can see 7.5 years of heavy daily or almost daily use, and it's still, you know, for all intents and purposes, you know, it's still 80% there. So it holds up pretty nicely. This has been, you know, plunged into all sorts of material, and it still doesn't rub off very much. You can take the coating off. I have a friend who has one that doesn't have the coating anymore, and here in Southern California we've never had any issues with rust, and his doesn't have a drop of rust on it. He doesn't really look after the blade like most of us enthusiasts do. So if you want to take that BT2 coating off, at least on this D2 version, you're probably going to be fine. I wouldn't worry much about rust. So I have rambled on way too long on this one, but I'll let it slide, since I'll forgive myself for taking way too long to talk about this, because it is one of my favorite knives, and I did want to give it some decent camera time. Partly a review and partly a love letter to one of my favorite folding knife designs ever. Benchmade, I know you're not watching, but I wish you were, and if you were, bring this back and give everybody a chance to try this blade out at a more affordable price. To anybody that stuck it out this long, thank you so much for watching. Again, I recommend it. If you can afford it, if you get the chance, try one. You will love it. That's it. Once again, thanks for watching. Bye.